One small mistake. And everything fell apart. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those days where nothing seems out of place and life rolls on just like it always does. But sometimes, the smallest decisions, the tiniest slips, can change everything. I never thought a simple choice, barely even a decision really, would be the thing that unraveled it all. But that's exactly what happened. This is the true story of someone I know. Let's call him Arman. A quiet guy, steady job, good head on his shoulders. He wasn't perfect, but he always tried to do the right thing. He had friends who trusted him, a family who depended on him, and a future that seemed all mapped out. Until one moment, one choice, took it all off track. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't anything illegal. It was just a mistake. Something so small it didn't seem to matter. But it did. It triggered a chain of events that no one saw coming. Friendships were tested. His reputation took a hit. And slowly, almost silently, the life he'd worked so hard to build began slipping through his fingers. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of something but you don't realize it until you've already stepped off. That's what this was. And the worst part? Arman didn't even see the damage until it was too late. By the time he looked back, the cracks had already spread. In the beginning, no one noticed. Not even him. But little by little, everything started to fall apart. And the truth behind that one small mistake? It's not what you'd expect. Stick around, because what happens next will make you question just how quickly things can change, and how one tiny moment can turn into the biggest regret of your life. Arman's story didn't start with drama. It started like most of ours. Early mornings, a cup of coffee, a job that paid the bills, and a quiet hope that things would keep going smoothly. He worked at a small marketing agency in the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. People there liked him. He was the reliable guy. The one who stayed late to help. The one who never made a fuss. Outside of work, his life was simple. He lived in a modest apartment, visited his parents on weekends, and had a close-knit group of friends from college. They were the type who stuck together no matter what. Birthdays, breakups, boring Tuesdays. He also had someone special in his life, Sarah. They'd been dating for a little over a year. Not perfect, but real. The kind of relationship where they could sit in silence and still feel close. But everything changed after a work trip. It was a 3-day conference out of town. Nothing unusual. Just presentations, networking dinners, the usual awkward small talk. But on the second night, something happened. Something Arman never fully explained. He came back different, distant, distracted. His phone buzzed more often and he started taking calls in the other room. Sarah noticed. So did his friends. When they asked him about it, he brushed it off. Just work stuff, he'd say, smiling a little too quickly. What no one knew was that Arman had made a decision during that trip. A small one, on the surface. The kind people make every day without thinking. But it left a mark. And even though he thought he could manage it, keep it hidden, life has a way of pulling the truth into the light. It started slowly. Missed texts. Forgotten plans. A little lie here, a small cover-up there. Sarah grew suspicious. His friends pulled back. At work, rumors started circling. Nothing serious, just whispers. But whispers can spread. Especially when someone's behavior changes and no one can figure out why. Arman tried to keep everything together, pretending nothing was wrong. But the cracks were already forming. And the mistake he made that night? It didn't go away. It followed him. Quietly. Patiently. And then, one morning, everything he'd been trying to hide came crashing down. Loud, sudden, impossible to ignore. But the worst part wasn't what happened. It was who found out first. That moment changed everything. And it was just the beginning. It was Sarah who found out first. She hadn't gone looking for anything. In fact, she wanted to believe everything Arman said. But that morning, while grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair, his phone slipped out of the pocket. The screen lit up, a message preview that made her stomach drop. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. The name, the tone, it was enough to make her realize something had been going on behind her back. Sarah didn't confront him right away. She sat with it, tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, she knew. Things had changed since the trip. The late nights, the excuses, the distant look in his eyes. And now, the missing pieces were starting to form a picture she didn't want to see. Meanwhile, Arman was falling apart on the inside. The guilt, the pressure, it was catching up. He kept telling himself it wasn't a big deal, that he could fix it before anyone got hurt. But it was already too late. What he thought was a small slip had started bleeding into every part of his life. He was messing up at work. Deadlines missed. A client account almost lost. His boss pulled him in for a serious talk. One more mistake, and his job was on the line. At the same time, his best friend Ray had started noticing something off too. They'd always been tight, talked about everything. But now, Arman was dodging calls, flaking on plans, acting strange. Ray thought maybe it was stress. Maybe Arman just needed space. But then he heard a rumor, one that didn't sit right. Someone from the conference had mentioned Arman to a mutual friend. Nothing specific. Just a weird comment about him getting too close to someone he shouldn't have. The moment Ray heard it, he knew something was up. And he wasn't sure if he could trust his friend anymore. Everywhere Arman turned, things were shifting. What once felt solid now felt like quicksand. The more he tried to keep his secret buried, the deeper he sank. And now, the people closest to him, Sarah, Ray, even his coworkers, were starting to connect the dots. The truth was closing in. And Arman knew he couldn't outrun it much longer. Arman could feel it. Everything was closing in. His world, once calm and predictable, now felt like a hallway with walls tightening around him. Every conversation seemed loaded. Every look carried a question. He barely slept. The weight of that one small mistake had grown into something heavy, something alive, following him into every room. Sarah hadn't said anything yet, but her silence said everything. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her voice lost its warmth. She was there physically, but mentally, she had already pulled away. Arman wanted to ask her if she'd seen the message, but he couldn't bring himself to open that door. Maybe if he kept pretending, it would all just fade. At work, the pressure was worse. His boss was watching him closely now. That client he nearly lost? They'd filed a complaint. It wasn't entirely Arman's fault, but the mistake happened on his watch. And when the team started whispering about it in the break room, he knew his reputation was cracking. He wasn't the reliable guy anymore. He was the problem. Ray, on the other hand, had stopped reaching out. No more texts. No more invites. Arman finally called him one night, trying to act normal, but Ray didn't play along. His tone was flat, cold. "Look, man," Ray said after a pause, "you're not telling me something. And I'm not going to pretend everything's okay when it's not. Just be straight with me." Arman didn't know what to say. The truth was tangled up in fear and shame. What if he told Ray everything and lost him too? But staying silent was slowly pushing everyone away. The breaking point came the night of Sarah's birthday. A small gathering had been planned, nothing big, just a few close friends at their apartment. Arman showed up late. He wasn't drunk, but he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his words stumbled even though he hadn't touched a drink. People noticed. Sarah noticed. She barely spoke to him the whole night. Then, in the middle of everything, her phone rang. She stepped outside to take the call, and when she came back in, her face was different, pale, serious. She walked straight up to Arman and said quietly, "We need to talk. Now." Everyone fell silent. The room seemed to freeze. Arman followed her to the hallway, heart pounding, barely breathing. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Don't lie to me." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She waited. The pause stretched longer and longer until the silence itself felt louder than anything he could say. Inside the apartment, Ray was watching from a distance. He'd arrived late, just in time to see everything unfold. And he knew this was it. Whatever Arman had been hiding was about to come out. And once it did, there'd be no way to take it back. Everything Arman feared was now right in front of him. There was nowhere left to run. Arman stood frozen in the hallway, staring at Sarah, still trying to figure out how to respond. But before he could say anything, she looked at him differently. Not just angry now, but confused, almost hurt in a new way. "I just got off the phone with Lena," she said, her voice low and tense. "She asked me if we were okay because apparently you've been texting her." Arman's heart dropped.
Lena.
She was the new hire from the conference. Young, smart, overly friendly, the kind of person who could make anyone feel like they mattered, even if just for a moment. Arman remembered the late-night conversation they had over drinks at the hotel lobby. He remembered thinking it was harmless. He remembered replying when she messaged him afterward. But he didn't remember how far it had gone. Or maybe he did, and just didn't want to admit it. "I wasn't," he started, but Sarah cut him off. She said you told her things.
Personal things.
About us.
About me.
That part Arman hadn't expected. In his mind, he had kept the lines clear. But maybe, in his need for escape or validation or whatever he was chasing, he had crossed more than one. Inside the apartment, the guests sensed something was wrong. Ray stepped out into the hallway, staying quiet, but his presence added pressure. The truth wasn't just hanging in the air now. It was knocking on every wall. Arman finally spoke. "I never meant for any of this to happen. But it was too late for intentions. Too late for excuses." Sarah stared at him, then said quietly, "You didn't just break trust with me. You involved someone else. You made it bigger." And that's when Ray stepped in. "She's not the only one," he said, eyes locked on Arman. "You might want to check your work email." That hit like a punch. Arman turned to him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Ray didn't look away. "Lena reported you. She sent HR a message this morning." Everything stopped. Even Sarah seemed caught off guard. Arman could feel his pulse in his throat. He hadn't expected this, not even close. A casual conversation? Maybe. Misunderstood texts?
Possibly.
But a formal complaint? "She said you made her uncomfortable," Ray continued. "That you cross lines professionally." Arman's head was spinning. He wanted to say it wasn't true, that it was all a misunderstanding. But he knew what he'd written.
He knew the tone.
The jokes. The late replies. All things that could be taken the wrong way, or maybe, in hindsight, were just wrong. The stakes had just changed. What started as a personal mistake now had real consequences.
His job.
His reputation. Everything was now at risk, not just with the people he loved, but with the people who paid his salary. And worse, he didn't know who else knew. Or what would come next. What he thought was a private mess was suddenly public. And there was no one doing it. The next morning, Arman woke up to an email from HR. It was short and direct. He was being placed on immediate leave while they investigated a complaint regarding inappropriate communication with a junior employee. He stared at the screen for what felt like forever. The one thing he thought he still had, his job, was now slipping away too. Sarah had already left the apartment without saying a word. Her toothbrush was gone. So were her books, the photo on the nightstand, and the small plant she always insisted he water, but ended up doing herself. He didn't need a note. He knew it was over. Later that day, Ray showed up. They hadn't spoken since the night of the party. Arman braced himself for judgment, or worse, disappointment.
But Ray didn't yell.
He sat down and said, "You messed up. Bad. But I think there's more to this than you're telling anyone." Arman hesitated, then finally let it out. The truth he'd buried even from himself. That night at the conference, Lena had opened up about her struggles fitting in at the company. Arman, feeling overwhelmed in his own life, had related to her. He had felt seen. What started as empathy turned into blurred lines. He didn't cross into anything physical, but emotionally, he knew he had crossed a boundary. And when she started pulling back, maybe he pushed too hard, hoping to keep that connection. Ray sat quietly. Then, he dropped something Arman wasn't ready for. "I talked to someone from HR too," Ray said. Lena didn't want to escalate it. She just wanted to set a boundary. She actually asked them not to take formal action. Arman blinked. "Then why the leave?" "They're investigating," Ray replied. "But someone else pushed it. Someone forwarded your messages anonymously." Arman felt cold. "Who?" Ray looked him dead in the eyes. "I think it was Sarah." That twist hit harder than anything. Not out of revenge, but out of hurt. Out of watching him spiral, watching him lie, and realizing she couldn't trust him anymore. Maybe she felt this was the only way to make sure someone listened. Arman knew, in that moment, he had lost everything. But what stung the most wasn't the job or the fallout. It was knowing that the people who cared about him had to be the ones to break him open. Weeks passed. The noise around the complaint slowly faded, and eventually, HR cleared Arman. There was no formal action taken, but the damage was already done. His reputation at work had changed. The way people looked at him, the subtle hesitation, the quiet glances, it never really went back to how it was. He chose to resign shortly after. Not because he was forced to, but because staying felt heavier than leaving. Sarah never responded to his messages after that day. No apology would have fixed what was broken. Arman understood that now. She didn't do what she did out of revenge. She did it to protect herself, to draw a line he'd already crossed. And maybe, in some strange way, she helped him face what he had been avoiding for months. Ray stayed in his life, though things weren't the same. Their friendship took a hit, but Ray saw the bigger picture. He didn't excuse Arman's actions, but he also didn't abandon him. That kind of loyalty is rare, and Arman knew he was lucky to still have it. He moved back in with his parents for a while. Took a break from everything: work, relationships, the constant pressure to prove himself. He started therapy not because someone told him to, but because he finally realized he needed to understand why he let it all fall apart. Why one small mistake had spiraled into something so big. In the end, it wasn't about Lena or Sarah or even the job. It was about him, about the blind spots he ignored, the choices he made when no one was watching, and how easily a person can lose themselves when they stop paying attention. Arman's story isn't a dramatic downfall or a clean redemption arc. It's messy, real, human. Like so many of us, he thought he could handle the weight of small mistakes. That as long as he kept moving, things would fix themselves. But sometimes, the only way forward is to stop, to look at the damage, to take responsibility, and then slowly start rebuilding from there. Because the truth is, everything didn't fall apart all at once. It cracked, piece by piece. And if there's anything Arman learned, it's that ignoring the cracks doesn't make them go away. It only makes the fall that much harder.